I first saw Jamie talk at a conference a few years ago, and he was doing a talk on the darknet, which is also one of his books from 2014, as if that's 7 years ago. Since then, Jamie's written 2 more books, Radicals, about political outsiders, and The People versus Tech in 2018, which is around data and democracies. In 2017, Jamie presented a 2-part BBC documentary series, The Secrets of Silicon Valley, about how technology was changing politics and society, including Cambridge Analytica's role in the 2016 US election. Most recently, Jamie has been working on a BBC Sounds podcast, The Missing Crypto Queen, which exposed the biggest ever fraud. The podcast has kept me intrigued and entertained for quite a few hours. It's the only podcast I've ever actually binge listened to, and it's absolutely brilliant, and I'm really excited to hear some more. So please welcome to the stage Jamie Bartlett.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, Cambridge Analytica, I was talking about that in 2017, got no credit for it whatsoever. It was all The Guardian. Oh well, I'm not bitter about that. Yeah, that picture was taken before it's been a long lockdown, hasn't it? Wow, really long. But it's really nice to be here in person. And what I thought I would do is talk about 2 of the subjects that I've really looked at in the most detail. So the darknet, first of all, which I know all of you will know about, but I thought I'd give you a little tour of some of the things that are going on there. And also the missing crypto queen, because we're talking about one of the biggest ever Ponzi schemes. Several $1 billion have been stolen. It's an ongoing case. And I think it has a lot of elements that are relevant for all types of cybersecurity. And I'm going to finish with a few speculations about where I think cybersecurity is going, or where it might look in a decade or so. So let's start with the darknet. I mean, how many of you have been onto the darknet and actually bought stolen goods or drugs or anything like that? Yeah. No? Right, okay. Yeah, I forgot there was a police officer in the room, so yeah. I watch my words. Okay, well, I have been on the darknet, of course, and I had to, for my book, I bought 1 gram of marijuana. So don't, we cleared it with the legal team. It was all okay. But the darknet, you all know already what it is, but actually there's a few misconceptions about it. So let's just start off with how we get on there. This is the Tor browser. If you remember the ransomware screen that popped up from Datto earlier, I just noticed it said you've got to download the Tor browser and go somewhere to make a ransom payment in Bitcoin. Now, the Tor browser is it's a perfectly legal web browser. It's a little bit slower than your average one because it has enhanced privacy features. It bounces your traffic around loads of different computers around the world that have the same software installed. But it was originally a US naval intelligence research project, because US naval intelligence researchers wanted to be able to go on the internet without giving away their IP address so they could snoop on people. And then they realized that if US naval intelligence are the only people in the world that use the Tor browser, everyone, if they see this browser pop up, are going to know that, oh, there's US naval intelligence on our website again. What's the point? So they made it open source, and millions of people now use it. It's perfectly legal. Essentially, it masks your IP address when you go onto the internet. You can go and download it now if you want. I use it all the time when I am going to research crypto scams. I don't want those people knowing what my IP address is, so I use Tor. You can use Tor to go on the normal net, but it's also your route into the darknet. And the darknet is a network of, no one really knows for sure. It's somewhere between the low thousands or low tens of thousands of sites which you access with this, where the servers are heavily sort of masked. They're very hard to identify physically, so it's hard to remove things that are there. And all sorts of things are available on there. URLs are a meaningless string of 14 characters, a combination of numbers and letters that finish .onion. And you have your whistleblower sites there. The BBC has a website there. The New Yorker has a website there. Lots of really good things are there. But also, as ever, criminals were one of the first groups to realize how useful this would be for them. So you have, I would say at the moment, I can't be sure, but there's at least a dozen or 2 dozen darknet marketplaces where more or less anything can be bought and sold. There's an awful lot of piracy sites as well. If you want to go and download any of my books totally for free, don't pay for anything, you'll find them all on the darknet, no problem. And a lot of sort of hacking services. If you imagine the sort of traditional hacker sitting there in the basement with the hoodie on working away, well, you can just pay someone else to do that, go on the darknet and just find people who do it for you. So you kind of have the good, the bad and the ugly, cheek by jowl, on this strange second internet, this hidden internet. Now, sometimes you read stories like the darknet is 500 times bigger than the surface web and it's all stolen goods and guns and hitmen for hire, and that's complete rubbish. It is very, very small, but it's very, very important because of the sort of disproportionate use it has for criminals. But because the technology is very good, journalists like me like to use it as well, and that is always the sort of tension that we have, and why I don't think this will ever go away, because there are so many good uses for it too. Now, when I first started working on the darknet in 2012, 2013, these darknet marketplaces were really used for drugs, buying and selling drugs. But over the last 5 years, stolen data has become probably equally, if not more important for people using it. And let me just give you a quick example. So you can actually see how it works, because you've heard about huge volumes of stolen data turning up on darknet forums and so on. Much of that arrives on one of these marketplaces. Dream Market has now gone. Law enforcement do a good job of often getting rid of them, but then what tends to happen is a few months later, other ones pop up again with very similar or sometimes slightly improved security features. So it's a constant cat and mouse game between law enforcement and the people that are running these sites. I don't think they're ever going to go away for reasons I'll explain. But here is what they basically all tend to look like. Every single one of these marketplaces operates much the same as all the other e-commerce sites that you've ever used, Amazon or eBay or whatever else. Except, of course, you go in there and you create a fake account. I'm going to give you a kind of step-by-step guide about how you go and buy stolen stuff on darknet markets. But it's obvious because you'd know the minute you went on there. You go on there, create a username and a password. You have your, usually you'd have some Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, or one of the other cryptocurrencies that are out there that you might send to the wallet that's hosted on this site. And then you start browsing through the different products. It's really that simple. And this is why it's become so popular. It's all about sort of easy user sort of functionality. Now, the key to all of this, and this is why when we think about hackers being incredibly creative and innovative, and you hear this all the time, it's normally them finding interesting, useful, creative ways of using technology that's already out there. Not necessarily just being brilliant at breaking into things, but thinking, how can I be smart and work out, like, how could I use PGP encryption and Bitcoin and Tor to create an online marketplace? Don't need any particular technical skills to do that. It's all just about planning and being clever. So the key thing to all of this is after anyone makes a purchase, so they'll browse through the hundreds of different products that are available, username, password combinations, stolen credit card credentials that go for an average of about $10 per credit card, all sorts of accounts that you can buy. And if you want to get fake accounts into any, like if you're Disney Plus, you can't bother to pay for it, people go on here and go, it's everything you can imagine. You browse through your options, you send your cryptocurrency, and then you get your products either through the post or as an email if it's a data dump. And then you go back onto the site and you do what you do on Amazon or eBay and write a little piece of sort of user feedback. This vendor was extremely helpful and responded to all my questions, and the product arrived as described on time, 5 stars out of 5. This consumer was... Now, this is the secret to why these markets actually work, because all that has really done is created a kind of market competitive dynamic into stolen data markets or drugs markets, because they're constantly sort of trying to work out clever new ways of keeping you, the customer, happy and getting you back onto their site again. So forget about the clever tech and all the rest of it. This is just a normal marketplace in operation. And this is why they become so creative, and this is why they've become so successful. The sort of degree of creativity and innovation here is really interesting, and it's not what you'd expect, but you'll never find more polite drug dealers than you will on these darknet marketplaces, because they want to keep you happy. There were, a couple of years ago, on one of these, well, I say a couple of years, it was a couple of years before the pandemic started, so that's 4 years ago. There were drug dealers that were selling organic and fair trade cocaine for your discerning user, and they even said that they would reinvest 30% of all the profits they made into local education programs in Guatemala. I mean, there's no way of proving any of that, of course, but that's what they claimed. So this is really what this is all about. It's essentially an always online, constantly evolving, creative marketplace for stolen or illegal goods. Now, what I think this really does, it's quite simple. It democratizes access to the tools of cybercrime. It just makes it easier for people to do this kind of thing. And it means there's always an availability if you want to do it. And if you've got hold of all of this data and you want to sell it, there's always an easy way to sell it too. So this is never going to go away. When I was 11 years old, I got banned from Woolworths for having stolen being an accomplice in a theft of a WWF figurine. And I got banned from Woolworths for that. I would have had no idea how to get involved in like some kind of weird credit card fraud or something like that. But if I was 12, 13, 14-year-old now in with the wrong crowd, this is really easy to do. This is what worries me. It's the democratization of these things. It makes it very much easier and much simpler. Now, John earlier mentioned about using the same password and why that's such a problem. And it reminded me of a story that I'd covered about this on the darknet, where we'd found, I was working with the BBC, and we'd found what we thought were stolen O2 username password combinations that were being marketed here just like anything else. We got in touch with O2 and we said, we think we found, they seem to be selling username and password combinations for O2. O2 ran this big sort of diagnostics on their system. There's been no data breach. We couldn't figure this thing out. And then we realized that what had actually happened is that some hackers had stolen 500,000 username password combinations from a gaming site with really poor security. And then all they'd done is tried those combinations on eBay, Amazon, Vodafone, O2, and every time they hit a match, it went into a separate database, and they just repackaged it up and sold it on the darknet as stolen O2 data. And that's how this thing works. Okay, so these are the kind of basics. The marketplaces, really simple stuff, sort of low-level cybercrime. But that's only part of the darknet. The other bit that's important for you is a slightly sort of more hidden area where maybe they're password-protected forums, invite-only forums, where the more serious stuff is discussed. Where, for example, people will actually meet in a forum and say, yeah, I work for this company, right? We've got loads and loads of really valuable data, personally identifiable information, credit card data, whatever it is. Anyone out there interested in this? Who's willing to pay for it? Or maybe they say, if you imagine like the old school where you, in the movies, you think of a couple of criminals sitting around a table planning a heist or something like this. Well, they'll do it in one of these forums now and say, yeah, I need someone who can build me this ransomware to target this very specific company. And someone else will turn up and say, yeah, I can do that. No problem. Just pay me 50% of whatever we make and we're all good. So this isn't about democratizing the tools of cybercrime. This is more about the sort of speed. Every time you find or someone finds a breach or a weakness, a vulnerability in some software, back in the day it might have taken months for it to pass around different hacking groups. Well, it's done within 10 minutes because it's immediately sold in these forums where all these people know where to go to get it. So you got, on the one hand, the democratization of the easy stuff, and then in these more sort of secretive forums, you have a sort of much quicker and easier way for criminals to connect together and plan things out. So that is a very, very quick summary of how these darknet markets work. But what I think really matters is that they're always going to be around. They're constantly creative. They're always trying to work out ways of making better products for, I was going to say you, the user, not you guys, but for the people that want to use it. And they get more and more difficult to close down all of the time because the technology is really useful for all of us. So this is here to stay. This is not going to be really depressing, this talk, by the way. There's like positive stuff as well, don't worry. Oh, well, this one isn't positive because this is the woman that's behind the biggest crypto scam of all time. So let me give you a very brief outline of the thing that I've been working on this story for like 3 years now, the only thing I've been working on, trying to work out where this woman actually is. So this is Dr. Ruja Ignatova. And in 2014, out of nowhere, she turns up and says to the world, you guys have all heard of Bitcoin? You guys have heard of that dude from Norway who invested $27 in 2009 in Bitcoin and he's now a millionaire. And you feel like you've missed out because the price of Bitcoin is now $400. Oh, man. Well, don't worry, because I have a new Bitcoin. It's better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's about criminals. It's used on the dark net by these dodgy drug dealers and stolen data merchants. I got one. It's called OneCoin. It's simple. It's easy to use. It's KYC'd. It's stored on a centralized blockchain, so I know if criminals are on it and we kick them off. And the best thing is, it's going to go up in value just like Bitcoin. And if you get involved now, you're going to become very, very rich in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Now, because people were sort of so sad to have missed out on Bitcoin, this thing spread like wildfire. By mid-2016, 1 million people had invested over $4 billion, 3 billion euros into OneCoin. And the way that they'd set this up was also very clever. So does anyone ever do or had friends that were involved in multi-level marketing? Because my mum used to be an Avon lady, and so I kind of remember, right, you've got to sell some of these sort of beauty products, and then you've got to recruit them to sell beauty products as well. And then if they sell some to their friends and family, you'll get a commission of what they sell. And then they try and recruit people, and it creates this huge pyramid structure that can kind of span the globe. Well, that's what OneCoin actually was. She said that this is like a multi-level marketing company, but you're not selling tablets and vitamins and all that rubbish. You're selling the future of finance, cryptocurrency. Now, the whole thing was an enormous fraud. She was inventing the price. She was inventing auditing documents. There was no real technology behind any of it. But when she kind of realized that people were onto her, on October 2017, on the 25th of October 2017, she got on a flight from Sofia, Bulgaria to Athens and disappeared and hasn't been seen since, with at least 500 million pounds of investors' money, probably several billion. So there's a couple of things that I think are relevant from this, frankly horrifying but also quite ridiculous story in some ways that I think matter to you. The first is her use of, it was kind of like an affinity fraud. Affinity fraud is where people commit a fraud, but they try to sort of use the credibility and legitimacy of other companies or other words and phrases to convince people that they're legitimate too. And one way she did that was, that's the head office, by the way. OneCoin joined the financial revolution. That is a copy of Forbes magazine with her on the front cover. Wow, Forbes magazine. Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, they're all on the cover of Forbes magazine. This cover she sent all over the world. People were reading it thinking, well, they weren't reading it, but they were looking at it thinking, wow, this is legitimate. I don't really understand the technology behind Bitcoin, but someone must be checking this. And Forbes magazine wouldn't stick her on the front cover, would they? If They hadn't checked it. But what you don't realize, well, maybe you can just about make it out, but this is obviously the Bulgarian version of Forbes magazine. And in the top right-hand corner there on that little yellow and red marker, it actually says sponsored content paid for by OneCoin. That's an advertisement that was wrapped around the original Forbes cover for the Bulgarian edition, which they kind of ripped out and then just presented as this being the real thing. It only cost a few $1,000s for them to do this, and they must have made hundreds of thousands of dollars when the sort of people saw this and decided that this was worth investing in. Affinity fraud is very, very easy to do, because essentially what she was able to do is sort of use this as leverage to get another sort of... She spoke at an event hosted by The Economist, and then she was interviewed by another magazine, and then she appeared in front of 5,000 people at Wembley Arena, cheering people, and all of it just lent a credibility. And she was essentially playing on people's laziness and people's fear of missing out. Now, she was very, very good, though, at mimicking the kind of way that people talk about this stuff. Let me just show you a little example. Here she is at London's Wembley Arena. I'll just show you 10 seconds of that. If it comes up. Can you hit play at the back?
I believe that OneCoin is really the only cryptocurrency out there thinking in a global and holistic way about how to make the coin usable out there. I don't know any cryptocurrency doing this.
Absolute rubbish. Lies. All lies. Okay. But so believable to so many people. And this is the first point about OneCoin I want to make, which is why I think it's relevant. It's a trick of psychology. I mean, that's what she was... I think I saw one of the stats earlier about people actually logging in, not hacking in, how important social engineering is. It's all really tricks of psychology rather than necessarily tricks of technology. And these guys, by aping the language, talking about the problems with Bitcoin, really playing on people's fear of missing out, using affinity fraud, it was all a trick of psychology, trying to persuade people that people were so desperate for OneCoin to be real, because they were so desperate to think they were going to make money off of it, that all of their critical faculties just flew out of the window. The second thing that she did with this, which is equally relevant, is they were always trying to make people feel like they were in a rush. That was like the number one trick they pulled. They had this weird thing called a split. I won't go into the details, but essentially there were, every 6 weeks or so, they would make these incredible special offers. Well, if you buy, this is why it's so ridiculous when you think about it. If you buy now within the next 24 hours, you'll get 50% of your coins for free, but you've got to invest right now in the next 1 hour before the thing runs out. And people would go absolutely crazy, phoning their friends and family, selling their animals, just to try to raise enough money to invest at that moment. This is tried and tested stuff. Create a sense of urgency, and it makes me think about, I think you might have already mentioned invoice fraud, and how often times invoice fraud is committed in companies 5 p.m. on a Friday. The boss needs this payment to go through. It's extremely urgent. It has to be done before close of play, intentionally to try to make people get sort of blustered by this sort of desperate rush. And this is the trick that they pulled too. And the final thing that they really benefited from was nobody really knew who was supposed to be looking into this. Who's regulating it? They're operating in every single country on Earth. Cryptocurrencies is largely unregulated. Multi-level marketing is largely unregulated. No one was coming out in the UK or elsewhere and being able to state definitively that this was illegal or this was a fraud scheme, because it took quite a long time for anyone to actually get to the bottom of this scam, by which time the whole thing, it took 6 months for it to reach 500,000 people because of the way that the recruitment system worked. But it took 6 months, I think, for it to even register on the Financial Conduct Authority's register that this even existed. So these guys are very, very quick, and they in the kind of gaps between different jurisdictions and regulatory uncertainty, and no one police force can easily go after them, just the same with cyber criminals, they're able to take advantage. So the things that I think I see with OneCoin, and by the way, I'm still looking for this woman. Looks like she's got a completely new face, several new passports. She has maybe even traded some of her OneCoin in for Bitcoin, so she's now like richer than a pharaoh, and is still on the run. Can you believe that? Sorry to sort of give the end away of the podcast if you haven't listened to it, but we still haven't managed to find her. So this gives you a bit of an insight, I hope, into sort of the creativity and innovation of these people. And it's not just about being technically good at all. It's much, much wider than that. In fact, let me tell you one other story. She was Bulgarian-German. One other quick story, which is probably my favorite cybercrime of all, which is from a Bulgarian gang, which wasn't even a crime. Well, no one can work out if it was at all. So a couple of years ago, a group of Bulgarian criminals had, I say criminals, I don't know how to describe them, very smart people, had built a machine that automatically generated hundreds of absolutely appalling songs, really rubbish, prefabricated, machine-generated music. And each one was about 31, 32 seconds long, and they made several playlists on Spotify. And then they set up hundreds of premium accounts on Spotify, and all those premium accounts did were listen to these soundtracks over and over and over again. Because 31 seconds is the point at which royalty payments of 0.0004 cents kick in. But they'd worked out that if those premium accounts, enough of them, listen to the same songs on repeat, the people that own the copyright to those songs will actually make profit. For months, these machines, these fake accounts, premium accounts that they set up, were just spending 24 hours a day listening to these fake songs on fake playlists. And someone realized after 6 months, and by which time they disappeared with $1 million. I don't even know whether that's a crime. Maybe you can help me out here. I'm not even sure what I call that. Again, it's not very clever. It's all publicly available technology. I mean, they weren't sitting there hacking into systems and all this. They just saw an opportunity and worked out that we could exploit it. And it's the same with all of these guys. At the moment on the darknet, and I'm sure you've heard of this as well, a huge amount of, opportunistically, a huge amount of vaccine passports. You're an anti-vaxxer, you don't want to get vaccinated, but you want your vaccine passport. Costs about $2,000 to buy one on the darknet. Every time something pops up, it will be available on one of these sites. Okay. So I want to just get to a little bit where I think some of this might be going. How am I doing for time, by the way? Because I couldn't see a timer. Right, perfect. 15. Does anyone know what this is? This is brilliant, this thing. I love this. Yeah, I think someone said it by Beeple. Yeah, it's an NFT, well, it's not actually an NFT, but it is basically an NFT, a non-fungible token. You've heard all the hype about these things, maybe. These are, I don't even know how to begin to explain it. Essentially, this is a piece of digital artwork made by an artist called Beeple. It's called 5,000 Days, Every Days, I can't remember the exact name of it now. 5,000 Days, the Every Days, or something like this. It was sold in March for roughly $70 million. Digital artwork, and what's kind of unique about it is the ownership of this piece of artwork is placed on a blockchain, a unique sort of authenticated token that proves who owns this, and there's only one of them, so anyone can take a copy of it and use it and whatever, but there's one sort of legal owner of it. It kind of comes out of the Bitcoin world, and someone paid $70 million for this NFT. Now, if I'm a scammer, my first thought is, wow, people are paying $70 million to buy a piece of, not even to buy a piece of digital artwork, to buy a token that's hosted on a blockchain that authenticates ownership of this piece of digital work. Wow, there's loads of scope for me to mess around with this. I wonder what scams I could pull with NFTs. Now, it's only a very small example, but you see all the hype about NFTs, and I guarantee you the next version of OneCoin is going to be some NFT-related scam. And this is where I want to take it. What's going to come next? So, based on what we know, I think there are three big trends that I think are really relevant for the future of cybercrime. And they're really simple trends. So forget about like smart cars and what's going to be the state of quantum computing in 15 years' time. I think we can start with much more basic and sort of broadly understood and accepted trends. And the first is there's going to be loads more data out there about us. We're going to produce more data. And that data is probably going to mean more to us because it's going to become more personal and more important. That's really been one of the big stories of the last decade. I've worked out, by the way, that by the time I'm 60, I would have created 250,000 WhatsApp messages, which I'm going to bind up and give to like the British Museum, not because I think I'm particularly interesting, but because I think like historians of the future might one day want to go through it and be like, I wonder what it was like living through the pandemic and what people were messaging each other on WhatsApp. So I think there's going to be there's like what we do with our data when we die is going to be a whole enormous industry. Like I'm planning to maybe program some bots to go and carry on tweeting and insulting people I don't like after I'm dead, because then I can't be held accountable for it. So there's going to be these weird, strange new things happening. But there is either way, there's going to be a lot more data about us, and a lot more of that data is going to be public. The second thing is that more and more of our devices are going to be chipped up. They're going to be our fridges and our TVs and our baby monitors and our clothes, and who else can imagine what is going to be essentially a computer. So more and more devices will be connected to the internet. Bruce Schneier, a really, really well-respected internet security expert, says that in a decade, saying I'm going onto the internet will make as much sense as plugging in a toaster and saying, just going onto the power grid now, everybody. How's that? Which is true. So more and more devices will be internet-enabled. And the third thing is that machines are just going to keep getting smarter and faster and better capable of understanding patterns, trying to imitate us, mimic the things that we do. All those three things are pretty reasonable, aren't they? I think we can assume those things are going to happen. But what's that going to mean for internet security? I think we can start making a few informed guesses about how it might look in a decade or so based on these trends. And the first thing is, and I'm absolutely convinced of this, that more and more things are going to be automated. Like crime is going to become more and more automated. Like every other industry we think about, we worry about the paralegals, and we worry about secretarial work, we worry about truck drivers because of automation. But what about crime? Crime is one of the biggest industries of all. Criminals are just as creative as everybody else. They're also often quite lazy, so they want a way of doing their work quicker and faster with less stress. They also don't have to worry about GDPR and all of that stuff, so they've got loads more time to worry about how do we use the latest technology. So they're going to automate more and more crime. And this is a very sort of simple and early example of this kind of thing. It was some security researchers that realized that internet-enabled devices, there are websites like Shodan which list a lot of internet-enabled devices, printers and CCTV cameras and stuff, but actually that information contains something valuable about the software that they run. And there's another database online called Metasploit, which is used by internet security researchers to see what the weaknesses are in different security systems. And he realized that you could just link the two things together, click a button, and automatically take lines from Metasploit and use them to hack into stuff that's listed on Shodan. And he just called it Autosploit. But I think this is probably going to be the future of a lot of cybercrime. Automate as much of it as possible. Focus on a small number of big targets, but for the rest, why wouldn't I bother just automating it? And I think that's going to mean all sorts of weird and wonderful things. 2 years ago, a group of security researchers put a fake accountancy firm online and just sat back and waited. They just basically made a website, put some information on there and waited. 30 minutes later, that had been found by basically a scanning machine, which had then immediately downloaded all the information, all the username and password combinations, and automatically created new user accounts for the people that had built it. 30 minutes from being put online to being completely exploited. Now, they made it easy for them to be exploited, but this is where I think crime is increasingly going. According to some estimates, you remember in the 1997 when Garry Kasparov was beaten by, for the first time, the world champion beaten by a machine at chess? And now the idea that a machine would ever lose to a human at chess seems ridiculous. How could we possibly beat these machines? People think that machine hacking is currently around about where Deep Blue was in about 1995, 1996. So in a decade or so, machines will be better at humans than hacking into things. They can do it all faster, they can find weaknesses immediately, and I think there are big ramifications for that. So I foresee a time, not so long ago, you saw about we have these automated phishing emails, quite easy to spot, although people do fall for them. Even police officers sometimes fall for them. But then you have these spear phishing, targeted phishing attacks, where it's much more personalized to the individual. But I imagine a time where that distinction doesn't really make sense anymore, because spear phishing emails will also be personalized, targeted, and automatically generated by a machine. Why wouldn't you have a machine that tries to collect all the publicly available information about somebody that's online automatically, build a profile up of them, draft up an email about them, to them, for them. Maybe it talks about what restaurant they went to last night and it's from the manager and it uses the same language that the manager uses and it's sent straight to that person. Can you confirm the booking for next week, please? And one of those emails is sent to every single person automatically at the click of a button. To me, this is obviously what's going to happen in a decade. And it sounds a bit ridiculous, but does it sound any more ridiculous than had someone told you a decade ago that a casino is going to be hacked into via its internet-enabled fish tank, which is what happened in 2018? Well, that sounds ridiculous. And I think it's worth trying to think about what might be coming down the line, because then we might be a tiny bit more prepared for it. And there are 3 lessons from all of this, and that's where I stop. And the first is, I'll put this one back on there because it's a nicer background image, and you can take a picture of it and, maybe sell it yourself for $70 million one day. But I think there are 3 ramifications of these trends that I see that will affect cybersecurity. And the first is, well, the basics are the same as ever. When I heard John talking about passwords, you get the passwords, and I thought, how many times have I heard this now? Oh, we're talking about strong passwords. And then I see that the most popular password is still password 1234. And I remembered that we in this room have sort of heard two-factor and good passwords and password managers all the time, but it's still not normal for a huge number of people. So those basic things, in a world of automated crime, it's still going to be the same. The basics matter. Just seems to me like we're all going to have to be a little bit paranoid. Let's say you received that 5 p.m. invoice fraud phone call from the CEO. Maybe they're using automated voice imitation software. So you've actually got a phone call that sounds like it's coming from actually, probably don't even get into that because God knows what we'll do then. But you could do something. You could go into the office and say, I need to double check this because company policy is any payments over £5,000 need to be signed off in person with me present with you before we send it. And I think it's going to be more about getting the sort of processes in place in a business than just sort of trying to come up with new things all of the time, because those basics will still matter. The second is that I think the risk profile might start to change. In a world of like infinite internet-enabled devices, more attack surfaces as hackers call them, or attack vectors, and automated crime, where you're targeting software vulnerabilities rather than necessarily companies themselves, any weakness will be found and exploited. And so smaller businesses, especially ones that have been forced to get online over the last couple of years, I know a lot of businesses that didn't want to do online payments and didn't want to have an online, even a site to advertise stuff, suddenly found that they're now online and they're now having to deal with this and they never thought they'd have to. Those companies, I think, sometimes think they can just sort of fly under the radar easily. No one knows about me. Why am I going to be targeted? I'm really small. But I think more automated crime changes that, because suddenly you're targeting software vulnerability, not necessarily companies. And then finally, preparation. So even when you do everything right, and you've heard this 1,000 times, but someone still gets through, someone still breaches your system, which everything I've said, decentralized marketplaces where things are available, whether it's automated crime, whether it's the affinity fraud, the clever ways that these guys are looking to trick you, even when you do everything right, something will go wrong. But in a world of more and more data that means more to people, I think that the problem is going to be consumers might accept that you'll get hacked. They understand that can happen. What I think they won't accept is if it's then found out that you didn't take it seriously, that you didn't have a good backup system in place, that you didn't have a preparation plan ready, that you hadn't encrypted all the data properly, because that is what they'll find unforgivable, that you didn't basically take their data as seriously as they take it. And in this kind of world, I think that is going to matter more and more, because the one thing that needs to happen if you ever do get targeted is people need to blame the criminals and not you. And if you don't do the basics right, they'll blame you rather than the criminals. And in a world where all this data really matters, that is the last place that you want to be. I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that wasn't too scary, but I don't think it was, because essentially it's the stuff that you've heard already. But I just think we're going to see it mutate and get even more interesting in the coming years. But I think doing the right things in the way that you do already, we're still going to be in a good place. And with that, I'll stop. Thank you very much.